I became more involved, you could say, with the Army Air Force Center for Low Intensity Conflict. They were involved. Actually, I reached out to them, but they were involved with things like a study of psychological operations. And so I became, you could say, a volunteer and introduced them to a person who I'd become friends with, a former Sandinista, a Marxist, who had, broke with the Sandinistas and had moved to the United States to study for a PhD, where I became acquainted with him. And anyway, he was a real expert, you could say, on psychological operations. That's what he had been doing in his studies in Europe, working in political theory on behalf of the Sandinistas. And so he was the real expert that I've met on psychological operations. But the term now being used, and I think it originated in Israel, cognitive warfare, and the term has been adopted by the United States and NATO. If you do a search online for cognitive warfare, you will find a number of interesting articles coming up. Now, they all projected onto Russia and China, of course. But if you read it and realize that what they're saying when it comes to Russia or China is really a projection of what we're doing. Because I've had this long interest in psychological operations and political warfare, going back to being a kid for some weird reason, I've read a lot about it. And, we had this hysteria growing over the last 2 decades of Russia's information warfare, as if they invented it. And you read Rand Corporation, which was really it was featured, you could say, in Dr. Strangelove, called the Bland Corporation there. Totally military madness, perfect example of military madness. Though they're a civilian group, they were founded by the Air Force. And anyway, they routinely, in the 1990s, long before Russia was even off of its knees, after our shock doctrine economics broke them, the Rand Corporation was selling this idea that we have to wage information warfare against the world. And that's really what it means, against the world. But in 1992, Dick Cheney, Paul Wolfowitz, Zalmay Khalilzad, and Scooter Libby all got together to come up with a justification for why the United States could not cut military spending, even though the Cold War had ended. You can find it readily on doing a search on draft defense planning guidance. And what they said, and it was leaked, the document was leaked. And so our allies objected because it was saying that the world now is subject to our military control, and we would not tolerate any country even having the ability. Came up in a document past my desk one day. We would not tolerate any country even having the ability could cause us to hesitate in our decision making, even for legitimate grievances. It's totalitarian. It was a totalitarian doctrine that was imposed. We were trying to impose it upon the world, and it's still our doctrine. Because of the being leaked, Zalmay Khalilzad says in his memoir that, they had to rewrite it a little bit, but they didn't change the meaning in any way. Then it reappeared as the 2002 National Security Strategy of the United States, which, again, doesn't go away. It just, unless it's specifically repealed. So it's still there. That's the way of thinking, the worldview of the United States, that we do rule the world, and you all are subject to U.S. military domination and control, and at our total, you're subject to our deference on how that will be exercised. Even when these things are presented as, and even has a sliver of so-called humanitarianism, it's always with the overriding objective of expanding U.S. military reach. And so, there's a reason why we have 800, 900 military, maybe more than 900 military bases around the world. Each one is like it's a power projection platform, you can say, a lily pad. So we really are around the world right now. Just reading today on a website news source from the Pentagon, actually, of how we're changing a division up in Alaska, into a paratrooper unit. But the point is, they've been writing about for years now of how the United States sees the Arctic as the next frontier for us to control, with obviously Russia there as a potential rival, which might give you a understanding of the geopolitical thinking that goes into, why are we using a proxy force now in Ukraine to fight the Russians?